Let's look at some more fundamental concepts in Sullivan's interpersonal theory, which is interactionist. Sullivan's work is important not only because it laid part of the groundwork for deinstitutionalization, but also because his work formed the basis for interpersonal psychotherapy, which is an evidence-based practice for psychotherapy that is still used today for depression and anxiety disorders. His work is very influential in terms of contemporary models of psychotherapy. Let's go back to Sullivan's initial definition of personality that we grazed over. He said personality is the relatively enduring patterns of recurrent social situations. He argued that each of us have personalities that are essentially the relatively enduring relational patterns that we develop as we grow throughout our lifetimes. We aren't necessarily unique individuals, rather we are collections of historical relationships. In other words, we are the relationships we have had throughout our lifetime. Notice how that places personality in the interpersonal space. It's not something that simply exists inside of us, it's the patterns of relationships that we have had with others too. You are not just you are you and everyone meaningful who has populated your interpersonal world. And some of the most important interpersonal relationships that we have are those from our early experiences as children. Sullivan was, after all, trained as a psychoanalyst. He believed that early experiences, largely with a mothering figure, formed a foundation for those relationships that followed. There are some odd components to Sullivan's theory. Again, he was a psychoanalyst, so some of it was a little weird. But he believed that at a young age, children catch anxiety from their parents, particularly from the parent who has the primary mothering role. He theorized that children catch anxiety through empathic linkage. You can imagine that you have a nervous parent who picks up their child because he or she is scared about something. Sullivan thought that this anxiety was contagious and was communicated to the children. When a child is calm and cool through the empathic linkage, the parent is calm and cool. When the child is distressed, the parent is distressed, and it works both ways. Anxiety is infectious through the empathic linkage. Sullivan speculated that children come to realize that certain behavior that they emit produces anxiety in the parent. In other words, they begin to distinguish between what behavior provokes anxiety or what doesn't. And because, as humans, we're motivated to avoid anxiety, we avoid those behaviors that we see make our parents anxious. Basically, we're motivated to behave in ways that reduce anxiety in others and consequently reduce anxiety in ourselves. We know early in life that some things that we do interpersonally lead to greater anxiety. Sullivan would argue that we behave as adults in ways that we know lead to lower anxiety in our parents. So in essence, we have an illusion of individuality. That is, our existence is in relation to others. This idea that we exist independently of others, Sullivan would argue, is false, and he would argue that we exist only in relation to others. And what we do as adults is we rely on old relationship templates to live in the present as free from anxiety as possible. The ways of being in our historical relationships that led to less anxiety are manifest in the present. It is the way we relate to others in the present. Conceptual maps from the past are imposed on the present without recognition that these present relationships are based on past relationships. In other words, our old relational patterns are imposed on present-day ones. So again, Sullivan is an interesting guy because he speculated that other people make us who we are. You can't get more situationally focused than that. He's a true interactionist. There is one contemporary interactionist theorist who has influenced the field greatly. It's Walter Mischel, who is currently teaching at Columbia. Mischel took serious issue with the prevailing trait perspective of personality in the 1960s. He argued that there should be more consistency in people's behavior across different situations if there truly were broad personality traits, but that's not what the research was showing. In fact, the research showed that traits did not reliably predict behavior across situations. Mischel found that on average, the relationship between traits and behavior was a correlation coefficient of roughly 0.3 to 0.4. On average, that relationship is relatively weak. For Mischel, that was way too low to put all your eggs in the trait theory basket. Why was this relationship so low? It means that the variance of behavior that traits account for is 9 to 16%. So 9 to 16% of the variance is accounted for by traits. Yes, this is a significant finding. Traits explain some variance in behavior, but not all of it, not even half of it. At best, 84% of the data on behavior is not accounted for. So Mischel said, do we really want a theory of personality in which 84% of the variance is simply unexplained? Are we going to allow 84% at best not be explained in our theory of personality? Mischel did not think this was acceptable. He argued that the broad dispositional or trait-based approach does have science to support its influence on behavior, but it doesn't give enough credit to the situation. The situation is surely explaining some of that 84% of the unexplained variance in determining behavior. He argued for a model of personality that accounts for both person factors, traits, and social situation or environment in a way that more reliably predicts behavior and personality. He believed that you need human experience, beliefs, and the social situation, and many other factors to describe personality. And in his Cognitive Affective Processing System, also known as his Cognitive Affective Personality System, or CAPS for short, he argues for those other factors to be a part of our theory of personality. Mischel believed that personality is really a dynamic system of what he referred to as mediating units and processes that are activated by and interact with the situation. Mischel's CAPS is a system of mediating units and processes that interact with the situation to determine behavior. What are these units? They're cognitive affective units, or CAUs for short. In other words, they are our encodings, expectancies, goals, motives, and emotions. CAUs are learned via our social experiences. They don't spring up magically when you're born. Your values are pressed upon you by parents, society, and culture. Your memories and cognitive representations of the world come about through your own experience with the world. You develop certain affiliations between affective or emotional states and goals or emotions and experiences, and those stay linked in your mind as CAUs. These CAUs continually interact with each other. No two people are alike in terms of their cognitive affective units and those behavioral scripts that are formed as a result. No one is alike as far as their CAUs, and no one is alike in terms of the relationship amongst those CAUs. Two people that grow up in the same social environment will be more similar than different, as their experiences and memories will be similar, but biology also matters because biology also determines some of our CAUs, like senses, and the way in which we perceive the world. So to plug Mischel's theory into this diagram, the large circle is a mind. A cognitive affective unit are those tiny circles within the mind. Again, they're our encodings, expectancies, goals, motives, and emotions. And they are inside our minds. You can see how one circle has a V in it. That stands for value. Values very much influence how we view the world. If we are religious or spiritual, that certainly influences our behavior. The circles with E and C are the CAUs that stand for encodings, which might be memories or cognitive representations of the world. The circle with EXP in it is the CAU for expectancy, which means our beliefs about possible outcomes in the future. The circle with AFF in it is the CAU for affect, or an emotional experience. The circle with G in it is the CAU for a goal. And the final circle with SCR in it is the CAU for script, which is a cognitive representation of the processes that you might engage in for a particular purpose. And all these other CAUs interact to make scripts. This is a fairly simplified model of what Mischel argued makes up our personality. Each of us is composed of a collection of CAUs. The contents of the CAUs are different for all of us. They come about as a result of our learning experience with others and the world. I have different memories than you do, so I have different encodings and CAUs than you do. Once one of these encodings is activated, then a certain value is activated, which activates an emotion, which then activates a goal, and then will activate a script that results in a certain behavior. The solid lines represent the chain of how CAUs impact or activate each other, and the dotted lines represent the fact that when one is activated, something else is deactivated. As humans, we have different CAUs and we have different linkages between our respective CAUs, which make us highly complex individuals. It's interesting to note that different features of the environment may activate different patterns of CAUs. The features listed in the box to the left are representative of the environment. These are different features of the environment that trigger different patterns of CAUs. Therefore, we could have two different people, or maybe the same person but in two different environments, that will have entirely different behaviors based on the environmental loading. The environment activates the different CAUs that lead to different behaviors, not the traits. Michelle believed that behaviors are situation and environment dependent. Furthermore, it has a lot to do with what individuals perceive in the environment and what they see as psychologically meaningful. If we are in one situation, we behave one way, and if we're in another situation, we behave in another way, and that is the basis of consistency in personality. Michelle said we have behavioral signatures that are unique to us, not personality traits. So what might be stable or consistent about a personality? Well, the situational factors that trigger behavioral signatures may be consistent. Values can be held remarkably consistent, or may make the person cognitively primed to experience the world in a way that is consistent with a certain value. For example, a person who is religious may have a chronically accessible value, such as morality, that is linked to many other CAUs so that this particular value is activated in most situations. It's important to note that you will read about CAPS being a contemporary social cognitive theory, and it is. It has many flavors of Bandura's theory of triadic reciprocal determinism, which says all person, behavior, and environment factors influence each other. And remember that consistency in this model is not a trait. Consistency is a matter of behavioral signatures. If you're in a particular environment, then you will behave in a certain way. If you're in a similar environment with different salient features, then you will behave in a different way. So consistency in this model has to do with the differential activation of CAUs.